Welcome, wanderer of ancient flavors. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, perhaps turn on a gentle background sound. Let your mind loosen and your senses open. This story is not a lesson, but a journey into the warmth of forgotten times, into the simplicity of discovery. And if these calm stories help you relax, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Tonight, we will travel far back, not to the courts of kings or the glories of empires, but to the moment when someone, somewhere, unknowingly created something that would echo through the kitchens of every age that followed. We are speaking of cheese, yes, simple, rustic cheese. But this is not about a recipe passed down, nor a perfected method. This is about a mistake, a soft accident of time and nature, of movement and heat, of hunger and patience. This is the story of the first cheese in the world, how it may have happened, how it tasted, how it changed everything. Before fire was controlled with skill, before even pots were formed from baked earth, there were nomads, people whose homes were not places, but moments. They moved with the herds, following the rains, the seasons, the scent of grass. They carried only what they could load onto their backs, onto the backs of their animals. And among the precious few things they transported were their water skins, made not from fabric or bark, but from the stomach linings of animals. These pouches, flexible and strong, were often sewn from the stomachs of sheep or goats. They held water during dry walks and milk during short travels. On one such journey, whose time and place we will never know, a traveler, perhaps a woman, perhaps an old man, perhaps a child helping the elders, poured fresh milk into a cleaned stomach pouch to carry it during a day's walk across hot stones and sparse shade. The sun was high, the heat was steady. The milk swayed with every step, gently stirred by the rhythm of walking. The pouch warmed slowly, not from flame, but from the warmth of the day and the body it leaned against. Inside that pouch, invisible to the traveler, the milk began to change. The stomach lining, still active with enzymes, began to react. The milk curdled. Soft clumps began to form, separating from the liquid whey. The longer the traveler walked, the more the milk transformed. It thickened, quietly and naturally, into something else. When they finally rested, maybe under a crooked tree or in the shadow of a stone, the pouch was opened. The milk was no longer milk. There was confusion, perhaps even disgust at first. The smell was sharp, but not rotten. The texture strange, neither liquid nor solid. But hunger leaves little room for pride. A finger dipped into the curds, a tentative taste. It was tangy, soft, slightly salty. It was not bad, it was new. Others tasted it too. Some frowned, some laughed, but they ate it, and it filled their bellies. That was the beginning, not a planned invention, but a gift stumbled upon, an answer to a question never asked. And from that day forward, the knowledge, however incomplete, began to pass. Not through words, not at first, but through habit, through doing it again. It may have taken years to understand that it was not just time that made the milk change. It was the pouch, the lining, the heat, the movement. Perhaps someone tried to store milk in a wooden container and found it spoiled. Tried again in a pot of clay and found it sour. But again, in the stomach pouch, it curdled softly, reliably. That was the key. And with this key, a door had opened. The early people did not have the language we use now. No words like rennet or enzyme, but they understood rhythm, repetition. They knew when something worked, and they followed that thread, slowly, with care. As they moved, they took the knowledge with them. And so, in tents near the eastern sands, in hills of green pastures, along riverbeds and narrow trails, milk continued to curdle, and cheese, primitive and patient, was born again and again. It was not always the same. Sometimes it was soft and spooned from the pouch. Other times, firmer, pressed between stones. It was shaped by the heat of the day, the type of milk, the mood of the fire. No two cheeses were identical, and yet they were all the same in essence. Food from waiting, from nature's quiet hand. And the people who made it began to see its value. Milk would spoil within a day under the sun, but cheese, it kept. It held its shape. It aged slowly. It could be carried farther, traded, stored. It became not just food, but a companion in hardship, a way to tame the unpredictability of hunger. And in this simplicity, something profound had been discovered. That change can be useful. That time can create. That imperfection can be a gift. All of it wrapped in the humble, sour tang of the first cheese. As you settle deeper into this moment, perhaps with your eyes gently closed and your breath even, let the simplicity of that first discovery wrap around you. Not every breakthrough needs intention. Not every success needs design. Sometimes the earth gives you something when you are only trying to survive. Sometimes the best things are born from walking and waiting. If this story brings you calm, remember to press the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is right now. And now, rest a little deeper. The fire of the story has only begun to warm your thoughts. The tale of the first cheese continues with footsteps, with trials, with care. But tonight, you are safe in the presence of quiet things. Stay close. The sun had only just climbed above the horizon when the leather pouch was slung across the traveler's back. It swayed slightly as he began his long walk through the dry hills, a rhythmic counterbalance to his careful steps across stone and dust. Inside the pouch, goat's milk still retained the memory of morning warmth. It was meant to sustain him on his journey, nourishment in liquid form, harvested at dawn, poured with quiet gratitude from the familiar hands of his sister. But something unexpected was beginning. The pouch wasn't just leather. It was made from the stomach of a young animal, stitched with bone thread and cured by fire and time. To the traveler, it was simply a vessel, light, durable, easy to carry. But nature had other plans. Unseen by the man, the rennet within the stomach lining had begun to act upon the milk. As the sun rose and heat deepened, the chemistry of transformation stirred to life. By midday, the man paused beneath a bent fig tree. Cicadas sang all around, their voices rising in waves. The dusty road shimmered in the heat. He reached for his pouch, uncorked the opening, and tilted it toward his lips. But instead of the expected flow of milk, something thick and soft pressed against the skin of the pouch. Surprised, he turned it upside down and squeezed. A pale, gelatinous mass slid out, followed by a small pool of cloudy liquid. He stared at it, confused. The substance smelled familiar, yet different, like milk, but deeper, rounder. He prodded it with a finger. It was firm but not hard, damp but not wet. Cautiously, he tore off a piece and tasted it. There was saltiness from his sweat, sourness from the heat, and something else entirely, something rich, unexpected, strangely pleasant. He didn't know it then, but he had tasted the first cheese. What followed was not a moment of celebration, but one of curiosity. He didn't discard the strange mass. Instead, he wrapped it in fig leaves and carried it forward, wondering. That evening, when he met another group of travelers, he offered some to them. One spat it out. Another chewed thoughtfully. A third asked for more. And just like that, the accident became a tale. In the seasons that followed, the event rippled outward. Other herders began experimenting, whether intentionally or by mistake. They began noticing that milk left too long turned sour. Sometimes it hardened. Sometimes it curdled into something inedible. But now and then, with the right air, the right temperature, and the right pouch, something soft and nourishing emerged. What made it all the more remarkable was how this transformation changed the milk itself. Without refrigeration or pottery vessels, milk could not last long. It spoiled quickly in the sun, drawing flies and sickness. But cheese could endure. It could be salted, dried, and stored. It could be traded. It could nourish for days or weeks beyond the life of fresh milk. And so, a quiet revolution began. In tiny shelters of wood and clay, people began hanging pouches from beams, waiting to see what would happen. Some used calf stomachs. Others tried goat or sheep. Some wrapped the results in leaves. Some rubbed them with ash. Each experiment added something new. Over time, they began to understand. Warmth helped. So did patience. Stirring changed the texture. Salt preserved it. Air aged it. And flavor? Flavor became a gift of waiting. Some cheeses were soft and fresh, eaten the same day they formed. Others were left in cool caves or dark corners where they grew firmer, richer, even sharp. The longer they waited, the deeper the flavor. Some began adding herbs, flowers, or grains. Others let the cheese age alone, listening to the slow language of time. One herder, an old woman known only as Talu, became famous for her cheese. She had once lost 3 children to sickness. After that, she lived mostly in silence, watching the hills and the sky. But in her solitude, she noticed things. The angle of the sun, the scent of drying grass, the warmth of stones after twilight. Her cheese, made from the milk of 2 goats and left to rest in clay pots lined with straw, was said to taste like the morning wind. People came from far away to taste it. Some offered salt, cloth, or honey in exchange. Talu never spoke much, but she always shared. When asked why her cheese was different, she would only smile and say, "It waits longer than I do." That was the wisdom of cheese. It taught waiting. It reminded people that food could take time. That nourishment was not only about hunger, but also about patience, about quiet. While bread relied on fire and meat on the chase, cheese was born from stillness, from the invisible work of time and temperature, of nature allowed to shape nourishment in her own slow way. This lesson would spread not through conquest or proclamation, but through trade and conversation. A wedge of hardened curd exchanged at a market, a pouch handed over at a river crossing, a taste shared beside a fire, and always someone would ask, "How did you make this?" And the answer was always a little different, but always began the same way. Well, once, by accident. So tonight, as you breathe quietly and the light in your room softens, imagine that old traveler again, his sandals worn thin, his hands calloused, the pouch of milk sloshing gently against his back. He does not know what he carries. He only walks forward through dust and sun toward the unknowable gift of transformation. Let yourself settle now. If such a simple thing, milk in a pouch, could become something so lasting, so loved, then surely your own quiet journey has beauty still unfolding. And if this story brings you peace tonight, remember to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. You're part of something ancient now, something passed down through flavor, time, and tenderness. The fire had long since settled into glowing embers, and in the soft light of dawn, the landscape shimmered with dew. The plains had cooled overnight, and the air carried that quiet stillness that comes just before the first bird dares to sing. Within the camp, life began again in whispers and footfalls, not as loud declarations, but as movements shaped by habit and need. A young woman, her hands still red from yesterday's effort of gathering thorny herbs, bent down near the entrance of a hide-covered shelter. She reached for the skin bag that had been tied tightly and hung on a forked branch near the fire. The bag had grown slightly taut overnight, and the smell that escaped the mouth of it was sharp and tangy. Inside, what had once been warm milk now no longer moved with the same fluidity. Something had changed. The milk had curdled. Clumps of pale solids floated in a thin yellowish liquid. Her nose twitched at the sourness, and she frowned, unsure if the contents had spoiled or become something else entirely. Her fingers dipped into the mixture, and what she pulled out was neither smooth nor slick. It was soft and firm at the same time, like wet sand that held shape. Without speaking, she turned to the older woman who sat nearby, grinding roots with the slow rhythm of someone who knew time could be trusted. The young woman extended her hand with the strange substance. The elder looked, leaned forward, and sniffed. She dipped her own fingers in, tasted a bit, and then nodded. This was not spoiled milk. This was something new. The older woman took the skin and emptied it into a shallow basket woven from flexible twigs. The basket was lined with grass, dry, brittle, and sweet-smelling. The liquid drained slowly between the weaves, and the solids began to settle, reshaping themselves without resistance. In the background, a child stirred a pot of grain porridge, and the smell of roasted seeds drifted through the camp. The morning was beginning like many before it, but this small discovery sent quiet ripples through the camp's rhythm. No one had planned to make cheese. There had been no ritual, no guidance from the elders, no dream from the night before. It had happened because someone had stored milk in a stomach, just like always. But this time, the heat, the movement, the bag, and perhaps even the journey itself had shifted things. The stomach lining of the calf, which held a trace of rennet, had acted without invitation. Nature had intervened. The older woman packed the soft curds into another lined vessel, this time weighing it down with a flat stone. It would sit in the shade for the rest of the day. She said nothing. There was no name for this thing yet, but she watched, and she remembered. As the day passed, the smell grew stronger, still sour, but also creamy, almost nutty. And when the weight was lifted, the curds held their shape. The result was not milk, not porridge, not meat. It was its own thing. The elder broke a small piece, offered it to the children, who took it with cautious fingers and curious eyes. They chewed slowly, unsure at first, then giggling at the taste that lingered on their tongues. It was strange, but not unpleasant. One child asked for more. Later that day, a man returned from a short hunt, carrying the lean haunch of a deer. He was tired, his face streaked with dust. He sat beside the elder and reached for the cooled flatbread resting on a leaf. The elder handed him a piece of the curds without explanation. He sniffed, shrugged, and bit in. He stopped chewing. His eyes widened just a little. Then he nodded. Not bad. Maybe good. The next day, the older woman tried again. She poured fresh milk into the same stomach skin and left it near the warm stone edge of the fire. This time, she waited. And again, the milk changed. Again, it split into curds and whey. Now it was not luck. It was practice. The woman pressed the curds again, left them in the basket, and watched. She salted the surface with crushed brine from dried reeds, trying to guess what might keep the flies away, what might preserve the softness. That night, she did not sleep early. She sat beside the coals and thought about the shape of things. A food that did not need fire to be made, a food that came from patience, from watching, from noticing. It was a new form of nourishment, not pulled from the ground, not hunted through the trees. It was something born from time, from waiting. When the third batch was shared, the tribe asked questions. What is this? Is it safe? Will it make us sick? The elder said nothing at first. Then, finally, she gave it a word, not in the language of certainty, but of story. She called it the patient milk. The name stuck, and the children laughed at it, but they ate it, and slowly it became known, not as accident, but as tradition. The elder passed the method to another woman, younger, with clever hands and a good nose. She taught her how warm the bag should feel, how long to wait before pouring, how the curds should smell when they were ready. She taught not just the steps, but the silences between them. And when the older woman died a season later, the young one carried on the work. With each passing moon, the tribe grew less fearful. They learned to pair the curds with dry fruits, to mash it with herbs, to shape it into balls, and store it in cool pits lined with leaves. What began as an accident became art, and what was once just a way to keep milk from spoiling became a gift, passed from hand to hand. In the stillness of the desert, among reeds and clay near fires and stone shelters, the first cheese found its home, not as invention, but as discovery, a quiet echo of nature's own rhythm, revealed through human hands that had learned to listen. If you're still with us, listening to the tale of how an ancient accident became edible tradition, we invite you to help this story travel further. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. These quiet stories live through shared curiosity. Now, prepare yourself for the next part, where this new food begins to travel, to be traded, shaped, and remembered. But first, breathe deeply and rest in the stillness of this ancient camp, where the scent of curdled milk mingles with the wind. The sun hung high above the flat, cracked stones that marked the eastern edge of the pasture lands. Warm winds stirred the pale grasses, and birds circled silently overhead. In the distance, the shapes of livestock moved slowly, casting long shadows on the earth. This was a place of simplicity and rhythm, a land where the days echoed one another, where a person could predict the cycle of sun and moon as easily as the stirring of hunger in the belly. Here, in a small settlement near the edge of the known land, lived a family of herders who had, over the years, learned to tame both the land and its animals. Their goats were their pride, swift on rocky slopes, sharp-eyed, and surprisingly affectionate. The milk these animals gave was not only nourishment, but a symbol of trust between human and beast. One of the elder women of the group, Ama, had taken the task of milk preservation upon herself. Wrinkles lined her face like riverbeds in dry land, and her hands bore the scent of leather, herbs, and smoke. Her methods were deeply instinctual, passed down not through instruction, but through repetition, rhythm, and observation. She moved slowly, deliberately, with the caution of someone who had seen enough accidents to fear the smallest oversight. On this particular day, the goats had returned early, and their udders were full. Ama sat cross-legged under a broad tree with her clay pots, listening to the subtle whistle of the breeze through the grasses. Her tools were few: a small knife made of flint, a wooden ladle, several coarse weave cloths for straining, and a leather pouch filled with what she called coagulation stones, bits of dried stomach lining from a young animal used by her grandmother before her. She didn't know exactly why they worked, only that they did. She warmed the fresh milk in a stone vessel placed beside the fire, not directly above it. Too much heat spoiled the taste, turned it bitter. Beside her, a young girl watched closely, her fingers curled around a smooth pebble, her eyes fixed on the bubbling liquid. The girl had asked questions, many of them, and Ama had only smiled. "Watch," she'd said. "The milk will tell you when it's ready." And it did. The surface shimmered slightly, a whisper of steam lifting into the afternoon air. Ama added the crushed contents of the stomach pouch, then covered the vessel with a cloth and let it sit. As the hours passed, the camp moved around her. Men returned with bundles of wood. Young boys chased one another with sticks, pretending they were wolves. The old men chewed on reeds and muttered about the coming clouds. Ama remained still, letting the milk rest. At dusk, she returned to the vessel. With practiced hands, she dipped the ladle and stirred gently. The texture had changed. It was no longer fluid but solid, trembling slightly with each movement. She smiled and showed the girl. "This," she whispered, "is the beginning of something better." Together they lifted the curds and set them into a woven basket lined with cloth. Slowly they pressed the liquid out, watching it drip into a hollowed-out stone. The girl leaned close, sniffed, wrinkled her nose. It didn't smell like milk anymore. It was sharper, wilder, more alive. The next few days were spent drying and salting the curds. Ama used ash from the hearth to coat the outside, a trick she had learned from her mother. It kept the bugs away and gave the cheese a particular tang. She tied the cloth bundles and hung them from the shaded beams of the goat shelter, where the air moved slowly and coolly. By the 6th day, the scent had changed again. Earthy, firm, almost sweet. The girl, impatient, begged for a taste, and Ama cut a small piece from the edge. It crumbled slightly, creamy at the center, and the girl's eyes lit up. She didn't speak, just held out her hand for more. That night, the family gathered to taste the new food. Slices of the cheese were passed around with crushed herbs, flatbread, and dried fruits. There were murmurs of surprise, then smiles, then laughter. The cheese was unlike anything they'd eaten before, richer, stranger, lasting longer in the mouth. One of the men called it sun-thickened milk. Another said it was goat gold. The girl simply said, It tastes like waiting. Emma leaned back, her shoulders against the cool stone wall. She felt something quiet move through her. Not pride, not ownership, but a kind of deep connection, like she had helped reveal a secret the land had kept hidden. Later that night, as the fire turned to embers and the stars unfolded above, the girl asked her, "Will we make more?" Amos smiled, her eyes half closed. "As long as we have milk and time, we'll never run out of this kind of magic." Meanwhile, in the distant hills, other families were learning similar things, some by accident, others through shared stories whispered at trading posts or beside rivers. The knowledge spread slowly, tied to the hands of those who worked with patience. Some mixed in herbs, others buried their cheeses in cool caves or wrapped them in bark or straw. With each generation, the method shifted, adapted, deepened, but the heart of it remained the same: milk, time, warmth, and care. The girl grew up remembering the taste of that first cheese, the warmth of Emma's voice, and the quiet way food could become memory. And now, dear listener, if this tale of milk and patience brings you even a little comfort, take a moment, lighten your space, sit back, and let your breath slow. If you enjoy stories like these, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Your presence here helps keep these stories alive, and your support helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. The fire in the center of the camp still glowed as the sun slid beyond the distant hills, painting the world in soft gold and purple. In the quiet that followed, the cheesemaker crouched beside a clay pot, carefully turning it in his hands. It had been 2 moons since he'd discovered the thick white mass curdled inside a goat's stomach pouch, and every evening since, he'd returned to that discovery with a new idea. Tonight, he was trying something else. He had learned that not all milk turned the same. Goat's milk thickened faster than sheep's. Cow's milk, if they could ever tame such large beasts, might give something smoother. But here, in the rugged valley where sharp cliffs and wild herbs grew freely, goat's milk was what they had. Earlier that day, he had filled a freshly cleaned stomach pouch with warm milk and a few drops of the sour liquid he'd collected from the previous batch. He left it under a shaded rock while the sun passed overhead. When he retrieved it at dusk, the change was clear. The milk had separated into curds and liquid again. He had begun to understand this was not a fluke. The pouch itself, with its lining of old enzymes combined with warmth and rest, seemed to coax the milk into something new, something alive. Tonight, he added another step. He gently removed the curds, draining the yellowish liquid into the ground, and wrapped the solids in a layer of woven grass. He packed it into a hollowed stone basin lined with ash. Then, with a flat stone, he pressed down. Slowly, the remaining moisture began to seep out. The curds grew firmer beneath his hands. It was not instinct alone guiding him now. It was pattern, memory, and careful listening. Around him, children played near the fire, the elders told quiet stories, and from a distance, the soft clinking of pots and bowls blended with the crackle of wood. The cheesemaker's hands moved with rhythm and purpose. He no longer feared spoiling the milk. He began to believe he could shape it. That night, as the stars emerged one by one, he placed the compressed curd in a cool, shaded pit, lined with pebbles and dried leaves. This time, he would wait longer. He wanted to see what happened when the curd aged. Over the next few days, he checked it carefully, always in the cool of morning. A skin formed, the surface firmed, a faint smell, nutty and sharp, began to rise. Some would have recoiled, but he smiled. The scent reminded him of wild herbs crushed underfoot, of wood smoke, of something ancient. Each morning he added to his practice. He varied the pressing, the wrapping, the length of time. He began marking the stone basins with small carvings to remember which batch was which. A spiral meant soft and fresh. A line with 2 dots, pressed and aged. He taught his sons how to feel the curds, how to press slowly, never tearing the fabric of the cheese, and how to smell the surface for signs of life or decay. These lessons were not spoken in long words. They were passed by gestures, glances, and shared silence. The cheesemaker understood something precious now. This craft was more than preservation. It was transformation. And each batch carried the memory of the last. By the end of the moon cycle, the first aged piece was ready. He unwrapped it with care, and the skin gave way to a pale, dense interior. He sliced a small wedge and brought it to his lips. The flavor was unlike anything raw milk had ever offered. It was deep, tangy, with a whisper of the grasses the goat had eaten. His mouth watered. He smiled and nodded. The next evening, as the clan gathered for a shared meal, he brought the wedge to the fire. He placed it beside roasted roots and flat cakes. No words were spoken when the others tasted it, just the silence of surprise. Eyes widened. One woman reached for another piece before her own was finished. A young boy laughed as it melted on his tongue. Even the elder, who rarely showed much expression, gave a slow nod. That night, after the embers cooled, the cheesemaker sat alone and watched the sky. A soft breeze carried the scent of leaves and earth. In his hands, he held another piece of the aged cheese, now wrapped in clean cloth. He had decided to keep it as a marker, a beginning, a memory. It was not only food. It was a link between seasons, between past and future. He thought of the first time the curds had formed, how it had seemed like a mistake. Yet now, through patience, observation, and quiet reverence, he had learned to listen to the milk, to understand the role of heat, pressure, and time. And the result was not just sustenance. It was something with character, something that carried the scent of the hills, the breath of the animals, the wisdom of slow hands. The art of making cheese had not been born from a single act, but from many quiet experiments, guided by curiosity and respect. And he knew deep inside that this knowledge would not end with him. The next generation would continue it. They would add their own touches, new herbs, different tools, better storage, but the spirit would remain. A few days later, a traveler arrived from beyond the river. She was lean, with a deep scar on her arm and eyes sharp from wind and sand. They welcomed her, offered her food, and sat her near the fire. When the cheese was passed to her, she paused, examined it, then took a bite. Her eyes closed. A breath. Then she smiled. "What is this?" she asked in a low voice. The cheesemaker leaned forward. "Milk's memory," he said simply. She nodded slowly and reached for more. And so the taste began to travel. By the time the first rays of morning touched the woven edges of their tents, the air was already rich with the warm aroma of straw, damp earth, and smoke curling up from quiet fires. The previous day's milk, now curdled and drained, lay wrapped in cloth, its surface firm and moist, releasing the faint scent of meadow herbs and firewood. It was here, in these primitive bundles tied by hand, that the transformation began not as an accident anymore, but as a conscious act. The earliest cheese had ceased to be a mistake. It was now a choice. Old hands passed the knowledge carefully, silently, as though afraid the secret might vanish like mist. Women knelt in shaded corners, squeezing the whey out of fresh curds, their palms reddened and strong. Men stirred milk in stone pots, monitoring the warmth with the backs of their fingers, adjusting the coals with instinct more than logic. There were no recipes, no written methods. There was only rhythm, the pulse of repetition, of seasons, of a life lived close to the source. Some began to notice that cheese aged differently, depending on where it was stored. In the humid recesses of the cave, it remained soft and spreadable, mild and sour, perfect for eating quickly. On higher ledges or in breezy clay vessels, it grew firmer, saltier, the surface drying into a pale rind. As moons passed and wheels hardened, an entirely new flavor emerged, deeper, sharper, filled with something that was both memory and mystery. This was time itself, folded into food. There was no need to name it then. The people simply tasted and remembered. They knew which milk gave sweeter curds, goat's milk for sharpness, sheep's for softness, cow's for creaminess. They learned that a pinch of ash slowed spoilage, and that salt was more than flavor. It was life extended. No tool was sacred, no detail too small. Even the weave of the cloth or the kind of wood used in smoking changed the outcome. Cheese, once an accident, became an art. In the center of the settlement, the oldest woman sat by the fire, her face marked by sun and wisdom. She held a round of cheese as if it were a relic, turning it slowly in her hands. Her fingers, though stiff, moved with precision as she pressed the wheel, tapped it with a stone, and nodded softly to herself. Around her, children watched with wide eyes. They had seen her do this 100 times, but still, each gesture held weight. She sliced a thin piece, handed it to the youngest, and said nothing. The child's eyes closed. The silence that followed was its own kind of praise. Far away, in another valley, a group of travelers arrived from the north, bringing their own version of curdled milk, wrapped in bark and thick with herbs. It crumbled when touched and sang of pine forests and salt air. They shared it with the southern people who, in turn, offered a sliver of their hard cheese, smoky and aged. No words were exchanged, but flavors bridged the distance. It was through such exchanges, quiet, mutual, that tradition spread. Cheese was no longer a village secret. It became a thread, weaving people together across lands and languages. The cows were milked again. The pots were scrubbed clean. New batches began. But now there was purpose. The rennet pouch was stored in a shaded niche in the wall, wrapped in hide, revered like a charm. Each morning, someone checked its moisture, rotated its placement, whispered thanks to the animal that gave it. These small rituals, unwritten yet sacred, shaped the culture long before any scroll or tablet did. Even the failures taught lessons. Milk that refused to curdle in summer's heat reminded them of patience. Wheels that molded too fast warned them to dig deeper cellars. Over time, they listened better to the air, to the beasts, to the food, and from that listening came understanding. One boy, whose curiosity outpaced his chores, began experimenting. He added wild garlic to a curd batch, another day honey. Once he pressed fresh cheese under river stones and left it for a week. His mother scolded him when it stank, but his father smiled when he tasted the tang. The boy did not know he was inventing a new flavor. He only knew it made his family smile. In this way, cheese evolved, not by design, but by daring. The ritual of cheese became part of the day's rhythm. After the heat of midday, as shadows lengthened and voices softened, someone would cut a round, place it on a wooden board with cracked nuts and sun-dried fruit, and pass it around. They sat on wool blankets, leaning into the earth, letting the salt and fat slow their thoughts. Chewing became meditation. The tang, the crumble, the creamy finish, it all became a language more ancient than words. Evenings were quiet but full. A man carved designs into the rinds, spirals, animals, stars. A woman braided herbs to hang near the cheese shelves. Dogs slept near the cool jars of brined curds. Smoke curled through the dusk. In the stillness, someone whispered a memory of the first time the curd surprised them, of the smell of warm milk under thatched roofs, of the laughter when the cheese cracked like dry bread. These stories wove into the air, binding the past to the present. If you're still listening now, wrapped in your blanket, surrounded by the hush of night, take a deep breath. Imagine those early hands shaping food with care. Imagine the cool stone of a cellar, the sharp scent of aging rinds, the comfort of something simple, shared, and earned. And if this gentle rhythm helps you relax, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Your presence here helps these stories continue to grow. Let your thoughts settle now. We still have one final part to tell, a soft ending to this journey through time and flavor. But for now, let the warmth of this world linger a little longer. The fire is still glowing. The cheese still rests, aging quietly. Everything is exactly as it should be. Generations passed, like the winds brushing against the mountainside. The cave, once filled with smoke and laughter, with clumsy experiments and delighted surprise, became quiet again. But it never returned to emptiness. Deep in the dark, where the stones kept their cold and the air smelled faintly of milk and earth, something lingered. Not just the scent of aged cheese, but the memory of a beginning. The people who first discovered the transformation of milk didn't write books. They didn't build monuments. Their names are long lost to time. But their hands shaped something that survived all empires and floods, all wars and winters. They passed on the method, slowly, gently, by teaching, by doing, by tasting, to their children and their children's children. And with each generation, the knowledge deepened. What had once been an accident became tradition. What had once been survival became pride. They learned which herbs could help the curdling, which caves were best for aging, how the seasons touched the flavor. They sang songs while stirring the curd. They gave names to the cheeses, names now long forgotten, names that meant sun-soft or stone-aged or milk of the wild goat. And in each name a bit of the world remained, the winds, the hands, the firelight. Centuries later, new tribes came. They found the old people's tools, their storage jars, and curious rounds wrapped in woven grass. At first, they didn't understand, but when they tasted, their eyes widened, just as those first ancestors had done. And so the knowledge lived on, not in writing, but in mouths and hands, in flavors and fires. There were times when the art was nearly lost, during droughts, during famine, when invaders destroyed homes and burned food stores, but always somewhere, someone remembered. A grandmother teaching her granddaughter how to stir and wait. A tired traveler sharing a piece of hardened cheese by the fire. A shepherd who left milk too long in a goat's stomach and smiled at the taste that came of it. The cheese survived because it asked for little and gave so much. It filled bellies and warmed hearts. It bound communities and sparked trade. Even when people spoke different tongues, the taste was a common language. It could be sharp or soft, dry or crumbly, mild as the morning or pungent as the cave, but always it carried with it a memory of patience, of watching, of trusting time. Some believed cheese was a gift from the gods, that a deity had stirred the first curd with a finger of light. Others told stories of spirits who lived in the caves and taught the people how to turn milk into stone. None of them were wrong, for in every story there was truth, that the act of creating something lasting from something fragile is a kind of miracle. And so the old cave remained, not as a place of worship, not as a monument, just a quiet hollow in the rock where once someone had left a skin of milk and returned to find the future. Now, as you listen to this story, maybe with your eyes growing heavy, the echo of those hands is with you. The ones that stirred in silence, that wrapped the rounds in care, that tasted with joy and wonder. Their story became yours, simply by listening. So before you drift into dreams, remember, if these stories help you relax, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Your support helps these tales continue to be shared with others who need a little calm in their evening. And now, let your eyes close if they haven't already. Imagine the cool air of the cave, the scent of old milk and damp stone, a distant drip of water, steady and slow, the soft rustle of grass mats. Somewhere in the dark, a tiny wheel of cheese rests in silence, becoming itself with every hour that passes. Let this story settle like dust on the ancient stone floor. Rest now, keeper of forgotten flavors. Let the patience of the first cheesemaker soothe your breath. Let the quiet of the cave wrap you like a blanket, and let these old tales carry you gently into a night of peaceful sleep.